So I have at least 4 favorite days of the year. That's pattern release 1, pattern release 2, pattern release 3, and pattern release 4. I love pattern releases. I think they're so fun. It gives you something new, a new challenge, and this does not disappoint. So again, new pattern day, welcome. We appreciate you being here. And our new pattern today is based on a designer bag, of course. So this is the Talise. So it's a mid-size shoulder bag, and the inspiration bag was kind of a combination between the two. The inspiration bag had accent strips, kind of like this version here. It also has a back slip pocket like this version here. Okay, this has a slip pocket that you can get in and out of for your cell phone. But the inspiration bag had pleats like the ones you see here in the top, okay? So it's a little bit different. Now, either one is included in the pattern. The bags are exactly the same size, they just have different details. The O-rings are used in different ways. So version 1 is this version here. It has this really cool woven panel in the front with using O-rings, and it's really a beautiful detail. I think you're really gonna enjoy it. It's absolutely gorgeous, very stunning, very classy. And the handles are actually attached with either Chicago screws or rivets. Okay, you have a really cool pleat here, which I think really adds to the look of the bag. And so either version I think you're gonna enjoy doing. It is an intermediate bag. Only really because of the way that the bag is finished more than anything else. Should give you a little bit of a challenge, but it's not too difficult. So we're going to get started on this tutorial. Like always, we're going to go over pattern pieces first. As I run through the tutorial, we're going to be starting out with version 1. If there's anything different in the pattern, at that point, I'm going to switch over and show you how to do it on version 2. These are the actual materials we're using in the video. So when you see the camel color, you'll know it's version 1. And when you see the gray and black and white, you'll know it's version 2. All right, so we're going to head over to the table. Let's get started. We're going to start out by going over pattern pieces. As I go through this video, we are going to construct version 1. And then when there's something that's different about version 2, we're going to flip over and I'm going to show you how to do that. So as I go through the bag making process, version 1 is going to be in the camel, which you saw in the beginning. And the version 2 will be in the black and gray, again, which you saw in the beginning, so you know which is which. So let's start out by looking at all of these different pattern pieces. There's probably a little bit more than normal, but not overwhelming. So the first thing we have is our front and back. Now, for this video, the front and back is done in our new faux fur, okay? And you have, of course, 2 pieces. Now, if you are using our new faux fur or lightweight fabric, you're going to want to put Decaville Heavy on the back of this instead of Decaville Light. If you don't have Decaville Heavy or something similar, you can go ahead and use 2 layers of the Decaville Light. So on the back, I have 1 layer of Decaville Heavy on each of these pieces, and of course I kept it out of the seam allowance. Now it's okay if it reaches the top because we're not folding this over at all. We're going to be finishing this top with binding. So just go ahead and put it all the way up to the top edge, no problem, in the back, and just make sure you leave your 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around the rest of those pieces. You also have 2 side pieces, and the 2 side pieces look like this. Okay. You have Decaville Light on the back of these. So again, you're going to keep those out of your seam allowances. The Decaville Light does not go all the way up into these little connector sections. This is like your little strap connector that's built in. So it's just going to kind of come to a point right there. Okay. Again, don't worry if you get it kind of close to the top. You really want to make sure your 1/2 inch seam allowance is correct all the way down each side and at the bottom. So you have 2 side pieces. Okay. Of course, we have 2 handles, and the handle construction for both methods is kind of the same, but slightly different. So we'll go over that as we go through the video. we also have a bottom piece. And of course, on your bottom, you're going to want to put some Decaville Heavy or something similar. Okay, keep it out of your seam allowances. You have two upper lining pieces, and your upper lining pieces look like this. Okay, so this is of course, version 1 has no stabilizer on the back, okay, and that's really important. So you have two of these pieces, again, no stabilizer on the back. So if you're doing version 2, and version 2 is the version that has the O-rings on the top, using O-rings as strap connectors, you are going to put some stabilizer on the back, and there is a stabilizer piece for that. Okay, so this is what that's going to look like on the back. Again, it doesn't go all the way up into the little strap connected part, it stops a little bit before. Now, the reason why we don't put any stabilizer on version 1 is because version 1 is actually pleated at the top, and if we put too much stabilizer, it doesn't want to pleat. So the next thing we have for version 1 is 3 pieces, 3 weaving pieces. If you are making version 2, you don't have that woven front portion. Instead, you have accent strips. So you have 4, I'm wearing black and this is black. Let me turn this out. You have 4 accent strips, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 accent strips if you're using version 2. For both versions, you have binding, and you're gonna have 4 binding pieces, okay? These are pretty thin strips. The binding pieces for version 2 are slightly longer meaning, okay, than version 1. Just kind of keep that in mind. And of course you have separate cutting charts for both in your pattern. You have a closure piece. That's the same for each regardless. And then we have our normal zipper pocket overlay. We have our slip pocket accent piece, and we have our key fob piece. All that's the same for both versions. Another thing that's the same for both versions is we have a slip pocket piece for our lining, and all lining gets some woven interfacing like classic fuse on the back. We have 2 pocket pieces, of course, for our interior zipper pocket. And we have 2 lining pieces. Now your lining pieces are already cut and considered for the seam allowance on the side, meaning you don't have to take a larger seam allowance. All that's been factored into the pattern piece. So you have 2 of the main lining pieces. Now, if you choose to do a slip pocket on the outside, you're going to have 2 extra pieces, and that's going to be your slip pocket piece, which is shaped like this. You are going to have stabilizer on the back. This should just be a Decaville Light. Make sure when you adhere this stabilizer, you're lining it up with these little indentation points, okay? So the top of the stabilizer goes right, you can even draw a line right across and just place that stabilizer right against those indentation marks, or right up against it. You're still gonna have a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around, but that's the top. So you're gonna have quite a bit of space up here. And then you also have a corresponding lining piece for the pocket. For version 1, you're gonna need 3 O-rings. These are 1.5 inch O-rings. You only need 3 of them for the front weaving accent. You also need 2 1/2 inch swivel clasps. You're going to need 1 1/2 inch D-ring. You're going to need 6 purse feet. And this is a shoulder bag. I wouldn't say it's huge, but it is a shoulder bag. And so I do recommend purse feet. Of course, we have our screw-in purse feet that we recommend. We think these are great, fantastic, easy to install. And then of course, you're going to need 1 zipper pull along with some zipper tape. You'll need number 5 zipper tape. And then for version 2, you actually need 4 O-rings. And that is all of the parts and pieces that you need. So I will meet you at the machine. Let's get stitching. Step 1 is handle construction. And just like with most handles we do, I went ahead and drew a line down the center, a horizontal line down the center of the handle piece on the wrong side. I'm going to place 1/4 inch double-sided tape about 1/4 inch away from that line. I'm going to go all the way down. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of the line. Now Now peel the backing off the tape, and if you ever have problems with handle twisting, it usually starts at the table. And what I mean by that is as we fold our handles up, a lot of times we tend to pull as we are folding. That does not need to happen. And then also you want to make sure you match your edges up. So I'm going to start over here at this edge, and I'm just going to make sure that the edge of the bag itself, okay, or edge of the handle is even with the other edge of the handle over here. I can actually go all the way to the other side and do exactly the same thing. Okay, and I am staying just underneath the line, about 1/8 of an inch. You don't want to go all the way to the line. You can go ahead and fold up in the middle. And then all you really need to do is go ahead and pat the rest of this down. Okay, see I'm not pulling or tugging on that at all. All I'm doing is just laying it down, making sure it's about 1/8 of an inch away from the line. The other thing I'm gonna do is refrain from taking my hand and sliding it down this, because all I'm doing is taking this faux and pushing it. And as you push it, what you're doing is stretching it. And when you stretch it, of course, that's when the twist starts happening. So you can see, even with me laying that down, how nice and flat that handle piece is. So we're going to remove the backing from the other side, and we're going to repeat that process. So I'm going to line up one edge first, and the other edge, then here in the middle, and just go ahead and pat the rest of this down. And again, you can see how nice and flat that lays, no twisting or turning in that handle at all. So now, of course, you just want to take the handle and go ahead and fold it in half. Now, the reason why we keep a little bit of space in our handles is because as we fold this, you can see how that space goes away. Okay, it's like a take up. So every time you fold a piece of fabric, it takes a little bit away from that measurement. If we had these two edges meeting in the middle, when we go to fold this, it's going to create bulk and it's going to cause it to not want to lay nice and flat. So just go ahead and, you see I don't have a lot there. It's just a tiny little space, okay? And then as I fold that, it's filling in that gap, and I'm just going to wonder clip it in place. Now, for version 1, we are going to stitch down one side of this handle only. And of course, that's going to be the side that's open. We are not going to stitch down the other edge, okay? So we're just going to go ahead and use 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and stitch all the way down the open edge to keep it closed. And then we're going to repeat that process for the second handle. Now, as you see, I'm using my Burnett machine, the B08. We do have a coupon code for you. If you go to our website, I'm sure we have it linked below as well, where you can get a percentage off if you order from Premier Stitching. You can always do that and then bring it to your local dealer if you have any problems with servicing. And then I'm using a size 90-14 needle and a Tex 45 thread. What you see here is a little contraption here by Purple Hobbies. It is a really cool seam guide, and these little pieces here come off, and this is the 1/8 of an inch. There's also some, there's a 3-inch piece, meaning that you have obviously 3 inches there. You also have one that's 5 inches, so you can see the difference between the 3-inch and the 5-inch. This will give you a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then you have also a little bit smaller one as well. So it comes in several different sizes. And whenever I'm top stitching, I always use the one with the indentation, because it allows me to have a seam allowance that is only 1/8 of an inch. And of course, that's notated on the actual guide as well. And you just go ahead and slide it into the area here. And then also this can be removed. I have a screw here that I use to take it on and off, so I don't have to stick it to my machine, and I just remove it when I don't need it. My stitch length right now is just under a 5. So there we have our handle piece. And for this, again, for this version 1, we are not going to stitch on the other side, which I know is a little unconventional, a little different. What you want to make sure of for version 1, if you typically put a little bit of double-sided tape as you fold the edge, make sure you don't do that here. So for instance, when you're folding this edge, if you like to put a little bit of double-sided tape here to hold that flat, don't do that, okay? Make sure you keep your edge free of double-sided tape, because later on when we go to install this handle, we're gonna be doing something a little different. We're gonna be opening this up and sliding that connector right inside there. So that's why we're only stitching on one edge and leaving our ends open. So go ahead and repeat that for the second handle for version 1. And if you're doing version 2, I'll go ahead and show you what we're going to do a little bit differently there. For version 2, I did exactly the same thing as version 1. I went ahead and drew a line down the center of my strap. I left a little bit of a space here, went ahead and folded this again and wonder clipped in place. Now the difference here is we're going to stitch down both long edges for version 2. Okay, so that's one edge stitched. We're going to go ahead and stitch the second edge. And there we go. So I'm going to repeat that same process for the second handle piece for version 2, and then we will move on. We're moving on to step 2, which is the main or the exterior construction of the bag. So for version 1, that's the version we're going to do first, you have your 3 weaving strip pieces. So I went ahead and drew a line down the center, kind of like making a handle. And this time I'm going to put double-sided tape right on that center line. Now you can either use 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. I think I'm going to switch to 1/2 inch here, just so I have a little bit better coverage. And you know, this is a small fold because you're only folding over essentially a little, you know, half of this, which is much less than an inch fold. So go ahead, and if you need to use a little bit larger tape, do that. Just feel like it'll hold the edges down a little better. This time when we fold, we are going to make sure that the edges meet because we're not folding this the second time. We're just creating the strips so that we can weave those O-rings onto the front of the bag. So go ahead and put one more. And then this time what we're going to do, I'll set these aside, is we're just going to peel the backing off the tape. And again, fold these long edges into the center. And you can see what a tiny little fold that is, okay? It's a little tedious, but that's what we need to get a smaller weaving piece with no raw edges. Now, if you're using leather for this, then obviously you do not have to fold this in at all. You can cut your pieces and pretty much go from there. Unless you're using a super thin leather, then you may still want to go ahead and fold. Okay, so you see here how my edges match. So now I'm going to stitch down both sides on the right side using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now that I have that complete, I'm going to repeat that process for the other 2 weaving strips, and that way I'll have 3 done that we can go ahead and weave our O-rings on with. Now comes the fun part. We get to weave our O-rings onto the front piece. So I'm going to start out by taking one of my O-rings, and it doesn't really matter which piece goes in first, but essentially I'm going to go over the ring for the first piece. I'm going to go, so basically it's over at the bottom, under at the top. Then I'm going to go under at the bottom and over at the top. And then for the third piece, I'm going to do just the opposite. I'm going to go over at the bottom and under at the top. And I'm just going to try to make sure that it's somewhat centered, although these can be moved. Okay, so that's our first set of weaving. So now we're going to take the second O-ring and we're going to do the opposite. So since my last woven strip was over here, I'm going to make sure I go under, starting at the second ring, and then over. This one was underneath, the middle one's underneath, so I want to make sure I go over at the top and under at the bottom. And I'm going to do opposite here. Okay, so it's just an over-under pattern, and you're alternating. So now I'll add the third one, and again, do just the opposite. So I'm going to go over, under, and over. Okay, now the position of the rings at this point isn't super important because again, you can adjust these. But what you want to make sure of is when you look at this, that if you look at any one particular piece, you can see it's over, under, over, under, over, under. The middle one is under, over, under, over, under, over. And then this last one is over, under, over, under, over, under. Okay? So now you're going to take one of your main pieces and let's mark the center because we want to make sure this is centered. So I'm just going to cut a little notch here. And then I want to make sure that the center strip is the one that is centered on these notches. So you can just line it up here at the top. And then go ahead and want to clip your second one on. And I do want to make sure that they're touching, okay? It just makes for a little bit tighter weave. Okay, and then I'm going to kind of pull them tight and make sure that the center strip, again, is right on that notch. Now you don't want to pull it so tight that this buckles, okay? You want to make sure it lays flat. It's probably a little too tight. But you want it to be taut, okay? You want it to be okay, so what I'm going to do is just baste across at the top and at the bottom to hold all this in place. And basting is just about 1/8 of an inch. Seam allowance, maybe even a little bit less. And you can increase your stitch length, but you don't really have to. I usually just, for me, basting just means stitching it on without any back stitches just to get it in place. And I'm going to go ahead and remove my seam guide here. And then of course you want to make sure it's straight. And any edges that you have extra, just go ahead and clip those off. Okay, easy enough. So now we're going to move on to attaching the sides. So our first side, doesn't matter which one you use, we're going to go ahead and now you've got angles here, okay? So of course essentially you want this to line up essentially like this, but when you lay this down, you want to make sure that at your, we are using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, at your 1/2 inch seam allowance point is where your seams overlap. So let me clip this in place and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So actually I need to come down. So when you're looking at the back of the front side, if you come in a 1/2 inch, like if you actually, let me draw a 1/2 inch seam allowance here so you can see what I'm talking about. It should be right on the edge of my stabilizer, and it is. So in order to get a nice straight edge here, what you want to do is make sure that your needle starts, of course, at the 1/2 inch point, and that 1/2 inch point is where your edges match. So you see, if you look at this from the wrong side, I have a little bit of my main piece, like a little triangle sticking out here. I'm not matching the very tip of this front piece with the tip of the side. What I want to make sure of is the intersecting point is a 1/2 inch in, okay? And by doing that, you will, when you flip this, your bottom edge will be straight. Now, if you don't get it exactly right, it's not the end of the world. If it's off a little bit, just go ahead and trim it, but you do want to try to get it as close as possible, okay? So when you clip this, your bottom edge is going to have a little bit of your main front piece sticking up over the side. Okay, and then we're going to stitch. Okay, so now when we open this up, our bottom edges should be straight across. And you can see I am a hair off. You can see it's just a little bit, I got a little bit extra side. I'm not gonna worry too much about that. That won't be a problem. So we want the seam allowance to go towards the side piece. Now remember, the side piece is the larger piece here. And we are going to top stitch on the side piece. Okay, good, looks good, and just gonna trim my threads. And then we're going to take our other side piece and we're gonna attach it on the other side. Now, again, as you put this together, you're gonna see you've got a lot of weird angles here, okay? I mean, in order to, because the sides are angled, this kind of goes together strange, but when you open it up, it lays flat. So if you're not sure if you're using the right configuration, go ahead and lay the pieces as they're going to be when it's done, when it's stitched. And you can see that as you flip this over, you're just gonna have to turn it to get it to all match up. Again, I'm gonna make sure that my my 1/2 inch is matching up at my intersecting point, because look, if I did this here, let's just show you, if I matched the actual edge, so let's say instead of coming over the 1/2 inch, I just matched up the edge of the front with the edge of the side, like we tend to do. Okay, let's say that that's the spot, and I go ahead and clip this in place. First of all, you're gonna see your top doesn't match, okay? That's off. But what the main thing I wanna show you that's gonna happen is that when you open this up, look at how far off my bottom is, okay? My bottom sticks out about 1/2 inch, and now that's gonna throw off the whole bag. You know, if it's off just a hair, kind of like it was for me on the side, it's okay. But if it's gonna be off this much, it's gonna be a problem, because that's essentially where my stabilizer stops, okay? You can see how that's folding right over that stabilizer. And now I'm gonna be stitching on my stabilizer when I stitch my bottom on. My lining's not gonna fit. I mean, it's gonna be a problem, okay? So I'm going to make sure that, and if you need to draw your seam allowance in, you know, don't hesitate to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and clip. And pretty much the way that we've worked this is that, you know, your tops will match, okay? They should come pretty close. And then that will make that bottom stick out, like I said, you know, about 1/2 inch. And that's gonna be where I start stitching, is right at that intersecting point. I'm going to open that up, and then once again I am going to top stitch on the side piece. so here is what we have so far. It's so pretty. This hair on hide sews beautifully. It cuts beautifully. It doesn't make a mess like real hair on hide. You don't get little hairs everywhere. I'm not sure how they make that work, but they do. So again, you know, you're gonna be able to kind of move these rings around. If the rings are, you know, if the moving of them bothers you, or if you're having a problem with it, what I suggest you do is on the under, you know, where the O-ring goes underneath the strip, just flip this, put a little dab of super glue, and you can go ahead and super glue it to the O-ring, and then that way it won't move. And you could do that, you know, on each portion where the ring is under the strip, and it will kind of hold it in place. You know, if you stabilize this piece well enough, it shouldn't really move that much. And as long as you've got the weaving kind of, you know, taut, I mean, you don't want it loose, okay, but you have it nice and flat, it's really not going to move that much. Okay, so we're going to continue by adding the back piece. Now, we are going to have to top stitch in the tunnel when we do our final stitching of sewing the back piece on. If you feel like you don't want to attempt that, or if that's difficult for you, don't top stitch the two sides on the back, okay? I would say definitely do it on the front, because I think it frames this whole weaving pattern pretty nicely. But if you want to skip it on the back, you know, you can certainly do that. So I'm just going to repeat the process by wonder clipping this in place. We'll stitch and then we'll top stitch. Now again, if you do not want to top stitch that last seam in the tunnel, don't top stitch right here, and then that way you won't have to top stitch on the other side. Once you have that done, you're going to go ahead and complete the round. So you're going to go ahead and attach your last two sections. Okay, so your last front piece or back piece essentially to the other side. Now you see you've got kind of a twirly mess here. It looks a little strange because again of the angles, but trust the process, it'll work out. So now we have to top stitch that last seam, and of course everything is together. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and slide the bag in from the back. Now you can do this however you want. If you want to start from the top and then stitch down as far as you can, stop, take it off, then pick it up from this section, you know, from the bottom and come down. You can do that. If you start and stop in the same hole and you tie your threads off in the back, you'll never know. And that may end up being what I do. Usually what I try to do is to take the bag and from the bottom, slide it all the way up to the top, start stitching at the top. So that way, as I come down, it gets easier. Okay, the pressure relieves. So let's see if I can get that in here. And you know, with the deck a little heavy on part of this bag at the top, or the main part, it does get a little dicey, but it looks like this is gonna work. So I'm just gonna pull this nice and tight, and I know this is hard for you to see, but you'll get the idea of what I'm doing here. Basically, I'm just top stitching on the side seam, or on the side piece. And that is stitching in the tunnel, top stitching in the tunnel. Okay. Great, it's coming along great. So what we're gonna do now is go ahead and find our middle, or our centers of our sides. So just go ahead and match up your seams and mark that. Now I marked my front when I put my weaving O-ring design on, but I didn't mark the back, so I'm gonna go ahead and mark that now too. So I'm just marking the center of the back. While I'm at it, I'm gonna go ahead and mark the top as well. I'm going to mark the center of the top of the sides as well, mine as well. While I'm doing it, mark the center of everything. And you know, a lot of times I like to do this after I stitch because depending on your seam, like, you know how sometimes we accidentally take a larger seam allowance than we mean to, or whatever it may be. Sometimes it can throw the center off a little bit. So I like to do it after I stitch everything together. Okay. So I'm gonna set this aside for just a minute, and I'm gonna get my bottom piece. And the first thing we want to do is install purse feet. So in the pattern, I give you some measurements as to how far in to measure and where to measure from for the purse feet. And we do want to put 6 purse feet on here because this is kind of a large bag. And since we don't have a seam in the center of our bottom, we can do that. A lot of times, the reason why I put 5 purse feet on larger bags is because there's a seam in the center, and it's usually not good to put a, you know, a foot right in the middle. So basically what I'm getting to is this is a bag that you could theoretically put 5 instead of 6, okay? I kind of like the idea of the 6 better. And you have, if you brought the screw-in purse feet, or if you have the screw-in purse feet, you have 6. If you have the prong back, you have 5. So again, either way works fine. So let's see, the center of this should be right about here. Measure this way and make sure I got it right. So I'm going to need to mark the centers anyway. Mark the center of the short and the long sides. Then I'll draw that last line. And then at the intersecting points is where I'm going to put the purse feet. Now, again, depending on what kind of purse feet you have will depend on how you install these. If you have the prong back, you're going to take a craft knife and just make a little slit. If you have the screw back, you're actually going to punch a hole and go ahead and install them that way. If you have screw back, I highly suggest you put a little bit of Loctite on the screw so that the feet don't come out unscrewed. You'd be amazed. I don't understand how it happens, but somehow things do come unscrewed. So go ahead and install your purse feet, depending on what kind of purse feet you have, and then we'll continue by installing the bottom of this onto the back. The purse feet are now installed, and so I'm going to put some double-sided tape over the back side so that everything kind of stays in place and I don't have to worry about the back of the screws scratching the lining or anything like that. Now, of course, you don't have to use double-sided tape here. You can use some kind of duct tape. You can use a Gorilla tape. You can use whatever you'd like. But I do recommend that you cover the screws with something, or prongs, whichever method or whichever kind of screws you have, or feet you have. Okay. So of course we already marked our centers of both our long sides and our short sides. So now what we're going to do is to take the main part of the bag. We're going to start with the long sides. I want to mark the center or clip the center of the front with one of the centers of the long side. Okay, so I'm going to start right there at that center point. And then I'm going to wonder clip all the way down. And now I'm going to wonder clip the other long side as well. So I'm going to match my center points. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stitch. Now, when you stitch, you do not want to stitch all the way to the end of your bottom. You're going to start and stop at the edge of your stabilizer. So I'm going to make sure that I don't go past the stabilizer in either direction, either this way or this way. I'm going to just make sure I start and stop at that edge. So I'm just putting the foot in exactly where the stabilizer starts, okay? Now I'm approaching the end of my stabilizer here. Just gonna make sure I don't go past that point. So you can see here that I stopped and started. See how I stopped right there at the edge of the stabilizer? All this is still free, okay? And the same thing over here on this side. Cut my thread. But you can see I didn't go past the stabilizer there. Okay, super important. So we're going to repeat that on the other long edge. Okay, so now that the long edges are sewn, we need to go ahead and make little snips so that this side piece folds. Because as you can see, we're asking a straight piece to fold, and that doesn't work. If you want the piece to fold on itself, you're gonna make snips. So what I'm gonna do is, on the bag itself, okay, not the bottom, but the actual bag, I'm gonna look at where my seam allowance is here from the wrong side, and I'm gonna make a snip just in the bag, not in the bottom. So I'm just gonna move this bottom out of the way, and I'm gonna make a little snip up to the seam allowance. Okay, so it's not beyond the seam allowance, it's not, you know, it's right at the edge, and I'm just snipping right to the seam allowance, not past it, not any further into the bag than that. So I'm gonna do that on all corners. And what that does is it now allows this side to bend and fold the way we need it to, so we can match our centers of our sides. So the center of the side to the bottom. Okay, and then one thing I want to show you is if your side looks like it's not fitting, like see right here, it looks like I got extra on my side piece. What that means is I didn't come far enough when I stitched my side piece on. So I stopped at the stabilizer, but maybe I cut my stabilizer just a slight smidge shorter, and actually I can see that that's off maybe about 1/8 of an inch. So all you want to do to fix that is to go ahead and re-stitch a little further on your side piece or on your bottom piece. So I'm going to maybe back up about, you know, it doesn't have to be a lot. Start just a little bit, maybe 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch, and just might have to go just slightly beyond the stabilizer there. So again, you know, our cutting and our stitching and all that does make a difference sometimes when we're putting things together. It's hard to, you know, the exact measurements can be off slightly depending on our cuts. So let's see if that little bit did it. So basically it's equivalent to took about a stitch there. So let's see if that helped. It looks like it did, but I have to go ahead and take an extra stitch on the other side as well. So let me go ahead and work on these extra little bits of stitches. So if you have that happen, it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It just means you need to stitch a little bit further. And that's if you have pleats in your sides, the actual side, the main part of the bag side, okay? Now, once you do that, you're gonna have to go back and re-clip your sides. So I'm just taking equivalent of about another stitch on each one. I must have cut my stabilizer just slightly smaller. So now when I look here, I have about an extra stitch here, so I'm just gonna go back and make another little snip. Having this little piece right here isn't gonna mess anything up, okay? That's not a problem. So I'm just gonna go through and re-snip. Okay, and now let's see if that fits any better. Yeah, I can already tell it fits a lot better. So see now, here in the corner, how that lays nice and flat. When I was off, literally about 1/8 of an inch, it was kind of creating a pleat right there. I couldn't get it to lay flat. So if you ever run into that with any bag, really, that's all you need to do. Just add that extra stitch. Okay, now when I stitch this, I'm going to actually do it from this side. So I'm going to stand my bag up and I'm going to fold it in so all this lays nice and flat. And I'm going to basically start stitching from the corner where my stitches left off and then stitch all the way down over to the other side. Once that's done, I always like to peek in, check the corners, make sure everything looks okay. Okay, and then we're just going to trim our seam allowances back, especially in the corners here. We want to make sure we get a lot of that bulk out. Now, a lot of people like to do a second line of stitching here, which is perfectly okay if you'd like to do that. Certainly does not hurt. You do have a little extra bulk where your 3 weaving stitches come, or weaving strips come through. So now we get to turn the bag. So that completes this. Like I said, the exterior is complete. We're going to set it aside. And we are going to move on to how to do version 2's exterior. So this is the exterior construction version 2. For version 2, I'm going to start out by constructing the pocket. Now, you don't have to put a pocket on version 2. It's just, you know, I want to show you how to do it. So let's go ahead and do it. So you're going to take your exterior pocket piece and you're going to take your lining piece and you're going to find the center of each one at the top. And then you're going to match the centers. You're going to put the pocket piece right side together with the main piece. Okay, so you can see you've got a couple little triangles sticking out here. That's okay. We're going to go ahead and stitch. And the seam allowances are listed in the pattern. So from here, you're going to flip the lining up and you're going to leave the seam allowance going towards the lining. And then we're going to top stitch on the lining. So now that that's completed, we're going to match the bottom of the pocket lining piece with the bottom of the main piece. We're going to wonder clip that in place. And when you do that, go ahead and flatten the pocket. And you should see that basically the stabilizer folds right along that edge. You can even go ahead and feel that stabilizer and fold it over. You should have a nice straight edge here. Now, if by chance, you know, it's a little bit off, which mine is for some reason, go ahead and clip it. But basically, you want this top edge to stitch or to fold around the stabilizer. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and top stitch that in place. Now, depending on whether you want this as your front or your back, you can place your bag tag inside this pocket. And if you want to do that, then you're going to have to go ahead and do that now. Okay, go ahead and stick it down here. Like I said, I'm not sure why. I obviously cut my pocket piece a little bit off. Let me go ahead and just trim that off. And then you're going to take your one of your main pieces, doesn't matter at this point, they should be about the same, and you're going to wonder clip the pocket to the main piece. You can just match up the bottom edges. And now go ahead and baste this in place. Okay, so I'm just going to baste all around basically the 3 edges. now we have our pocket. No linings peeking through because we have a little bit of our front on the back side there. Okay. So now we're going to attach our side piece, one of our side pieces. And we can do this the same way we did for the version 1. So I'm just going to take one of my side pieces. I'm going to make sure that the bottom part is clipped right where the seam allowance is going to be. Okay, so I know I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance here, and if I draw that in, I want to make sure that the two pieces match at that point. What that means is some of your front and or back piece, whichever one it's going to be for you, is going to be up facing it or in the back a little bit. You can see a little triangle there. Okay, if you match the edge with the edge, when you open this up, your bottoms are not going to be straight here. Okay, they're going to be off. And so you really want to make sure they're straight. So, you know, look at where that seam allowance is at the bottom and make sure that is where the intersecting point is. So once you stitch that in place, okay, go ahead and open it up and go ahead and attach your other side piece to the other side here. And pretty much if you match your top edges, your side piece should come in right at the right spot. You're at the bottom here, your seam allowance should match up pretty perfectly. So this is what we have. And now you want to go ahead and stitch, and we're not doing this for decorative purposes. We're doing this to hold the seam allowance in place because we're going to put our accent strip on here. So just go ahead and kind of pull this tight, meaning, you know, pull your side so it's nice and tight. And you're going to stitch basically, you know, it doesn't even have to be 1/8 of an inch. It could be less than that. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be pretty, but just stitch on your side piece to hold that seam allowance underneath. So the maximum is going to be 1/8 of an inch, but it doesn't even have to be that. I mean, as far as width, or don't worry if it's crooked. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So see, by lining the seams up, the side pieces to the front and back piece, my bottom edge is nice and straight. Okay, the way I showed you where you actually match up where the seam allowance comes in. All right, so we're gonna set this aside for just a minute because we need to deal with our accent strips. So take your 4 accent strips and we're gonna draw a horizontal line down the center and we're gonna fold these edges in. Now these accent strips are larger than your weaving strips. So if you've made version 1 and now you're moving on to version 2 or vice versa, make sure that you're not cutting the same width here. Just look at the cutting chart, everything is clear on that. And it will tell you exactly where you need to, how you need to cut. And then of course you're just going to go center-wise all the way down. So I'll do that on all 4 pieces. I'm going to do one for right now. And then I'm going to take my double-sided tape and place it right over that line. So right on top. Peel the backing off, and we're going to fold these edges to that center line. And this is a spot where we do want these long edges to meet in the middle. Okay, once I have my edges folded, I'm going to take a piece of double-sided tape and run it right down the center. So on the wrong side, I'm going to cover that seam. Okay, go ahead and peel the backing off that tape, and you're going to place it right over one of these seams. And you just want to center it as best you can, as long as you're covering the stitch line and the seam itself. Go ahead and lay that down. And so now we're going to top stitch this on 1/8 of an inch on both sides of this strip. So my double-sided tape is in my seam some, and it is not, my machine doesn't love that, okay? I'm actually using a pretty sticky version of the double-sided tape. So I'm gonna just try to kind of, actually, it doesn't look like it's in the seam over here. Okay, let me try that. That side looks a lot better. So again, black on black makes it nice because you really can't tell. Okay, but there's our strip. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to take another one of my accent strips. I'm going to go ahead and fold it into the edge, and then I'm going to place it on the other seam and top stitch it in place. Once you have the strips stitched to one side, and this presumably is the side with your pocket, you can go ahead and get your other front and or back piece, whichever you would like it to be, and attach it to the other side, or one of the other sides. Now, when we top stitch this accent piece on, we are going to be stitching in the tunnel. And so if that's something you're not comfortable with, maybe you just put your accent pieces on the front and you leave them off the back. So again, I'm going to make sure that my seam allowance is right where the intersection begins here of the two pieces. And I'm going to stitch this in place. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and top stitch to hold that seam allowance in place. Again, the seam allowance is going towards the side piece. Nothing fancy here. And again, if you do not want the strips on the opposite side, the front or the back, whichever it is, because you don't want to do it in the tunnel, maybe you don't top stitch, you don't do anything here, you just leave it just like it is. That's totally up to you how you want to handle that. Whatever your comfort level is, we will put the accent strips on this side in the video so that you can see how to stitch in the tunnel. Okay, now that that seam is top stitched down, I'm going to go ahead and put this accent piece on there just like I did on the other side. And I'll stitch that in place. I did find that on my brunette, I had to lessen the presser foot tension just a tad. We do have a lot of thickness here, and it was causing the foot to drag some, and so loosening that does help. So if you have a presser foot tension dial and you're using domestic, go ahead and loosen that just a little bit. So now that that is on, we're going to take these last two edges and wonder clip them together. And of course, once again, I'm just going to make sure that the seam is lined up so that where I start and stop is intersecting properly. And you can see here we kind of have a twisted mess, but it's because of the angles of the bag. So just kind of push this down some and you'll be okay to go ahead and stitch the seam. Because of course, when we open this up, we want this to lay nice and flat. So I'm going to make sure this is lined up. It looks like it's off just a tad, so let me adjust that. So now we need to stitch in the tunnel. So what that means is the first thing we're going to do is stitch that seam allowance down. And we're going to have to stitch in the tunnel to do that because of course now the bag is in a circle. So you can do this a couple different ways. You can start at the top and stitch down as far as you can go, stop, and then cut your threads and then pick it up from the other side, which is, of course, is always fine to do that. Just start and stop in the same stitch, pull your threads through to the back, and then you'll tie them off. Or you can go ahead and, slide the bag on from the front here, slide it all the way to the top, go ahead and start stitching. And then as you stitch, the seam is going to kind of get a little easier because the bag's releasing. So it's whichever way you feel most comfortable with. I'm going to go ahead and start from the top, stitch down as far as I can, and then cut my threads and switch positions and then keep stitching. And right about there is where I'm finding it hard to see, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut my threads. So now I'm going to come in from the back side and go ahead and start right about where I left off. And again, this seam doesn't have to be pretty. This is just hop stitch that down. We're going to put an accent piece over this. So if you want to turn this around to lay this accent piece down, you can certainly do that. I'm just going to go ahead and kind of open this up and lay the accent piece down. So I'm going to start from the top, stitch down as far as I can go, and then go ahead and cut my threads, and then go back to the top and go to the other side and stitch down as far as I can go. And then I'll cut the threads and then come in from the back side. We just have a lot of bulk here, more so than the other bag, because the other bag we were just top stitching the seam down, where here we're actually adding the accent piece. Okay, so right about there is where I feel good about it. Can't really see, so I'm going to go ahead and cut my threads and move to the other side. Okay, so right about there is where I'm comfortable, so I'm going to go ahead and cut the threads again and make sure I leave my tails long so I can pull the threads through to the back and cut them off, or tie them off rather. So now I'm going to slide the bag in from the bottom side and just make sure I start in the same holes where I stopped, and go ahead and stitch the rest of the way down. So now I'm just going to flip this over and pull the bobbin threads through on the back and go ahead and tie these off, and we'll be done with these accent strips. And then I'm going to put a piece of double-sided tape to hold that knot in place so that it does not come apart. So I'm going to go ahead and tie off this other thread, and then we'll continue. Okay, now that these are all tied off, I have the exterior, all the accent strips on. Everything is looking good inside here. You want to go ahead and install purse feet on your bottom piece. So I tell you how far to measure from each side, long side, short side, and I also go ahead and add a line down the center. The bag's big, I think 6 purse feet are, is a good number. However, if for some reason you only have 5, you can easily put one in the center instead of putting 2 here in the center. Because there's no seam down the center of this bottom, you can easily put one there without any issues. So install your purse feet depending on what kind of purse feet you have, whether you have screw, rivet, prong, whatever it may be. And, once you're done, go ahead and cover them with some kind of tape or just something to kind of protect the surface of your lining. What you don't want are these screws or prongs or whatever it may be rubbing against the lining and causing any issues. So I like to use double-sided tape. I know some people like to use duct tape, Gorilla tape. I mean, whatever works is a good deal. Okay, so once those are all covered and ready to go, I found the center of my long edges because I wanted to find that center point for the line, but I'm going to go ahead and find the center of the short edges as well. And then on the main part of the bag, I'm going to do the same thing. And I usually wait to try to find the center of sides and everything until I'm done sewing because, sometimes seams don't quite, maybe we take a little more, a little less on a seam and the center points can get off at that point. So go ahead and match up and mark the center of the side at the bottom. And do the same thing over here at the top, at the bottom of the other side. And then I'm also going to find the center of where the front and back is. So to do that, I'm going to just kind of match up my center lines, match up my seams. And mark the center. Mark the center. Now, while I'm at it, I'm going to mark the center of my sides as well. At the top. And then also the front and back. Okay, so now that all of that is done, let's go ahead and wonder clip the bottom to the long edges. So I'm going to start out by centering the notch at the long edge of the bottom to the front or back, whichever, doesn't matter, but one of the long edges on your bag. And when we stitch this bottom on, we're going to stitch basically around the stabilizer. So as we start and stop these stitches, We're going to stitch the long edges first. You're going to start at the edge of the stabilizer and you're going to stitch all the way to the other edge of the stabilizer. You could go about 1/8 of an inch beyond just so that you can, because when you go to do this side seam, you don't want to stitch on your stabilizer. You're going to want to meet up with your original stitches. So just maybe about, 1 stitch past the stabilizer on each long edge. Now on the part where the pocket is, we do have some thickness there, so you might want to lessen your presser foot tension if you have a machine that you can do that on. And of course, if you're working with an industrial machine, you should not have any problems at all. We're going to turn this around and we're going to stitch the other long side on. We're going to do the same thing, stitch about 1/8 of an inch beyond our stabilizer. You just don't want to go past it all the way to the edge of the bag or the edge of the bottom. Okay. So now what we need to do is go ahead and clip, meaning snip your scissors, up to the stitch line on the bag itself, not the bottom. So I'm just going to kind of pull this bottom away and snip up to that stitch line. Don't snip past it. You're just snipping up to it. Okay, so you can see here, not snipping the bottom. Stitch line ends right here. So I'm just snipping right to that point. And this is going to allow our bag to turn so we can now wonder clip our sides. So go ahead and find the center of your notch on your side and on your bottom, wonder clip together. Let me do the same thing on this side. And now, when you stitch this side seam here, what you want to do is turn the bag so it's right side up like this. And kind of push this side down. So this lays nice and flat. And now what you're going to do is pick up where you left off on your stitching, and you're going to stitch all the way to the other point. So you're basically connecting your stitches. Once that's done, I like to just kind of peek in and make sure everything looks okay. And then we're going to cut these seam allowances back. Now, where your pocket is, you've got some bulk here. And if you remember, we basted the bottom edge. You really want to at least cut off that basting stitch and try to get as close as you can so that you can get as much bulk out of there as possible. Okay, because we have several layers here that we're going to contend with. So now that that's complete, we can go ahead and turn the bag. Now, when you turn a bag, if it wrinkles some, which, you know, a lot of times it does, this is going to be the time to get a iron in here. So a lot of times what I'll do at this point is take a iron and go ahead and iron this, you know, directly on the inside here. It, you know, you had to iron, obviously either iron or heat press the stabilizer on. So it's not going to hurt it to do that. Okay. So there we have the exterior. Now, of course, any part of your accent strips that are sticking up, you can go ahead and just trim those off. Make everything nice and even. Same thing on this side. And there's our nice slip pocket for our cell phone or whatever you may need that for. Okay, so there we are. So that is the exterior of version 2. So the lining for versions 1 and 2 are constructed exactly the same. So we're going to go ahead and do the lining, which is step 3. We're going to do it in version 1, but again, the steps are the same. So 1 or 2, the next step is lining construction. We're going to move on to that. And we're going to start on the lining, and this is, again, the same for both versions. So we're just going to go ahead and do version 1. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my zipper and put the wrong side of the zipper against the right side of the pocket, and we're going to stitch. From here, you want to go ahead and take the seam allowance and lay it flat against the pocket. And I'm just going to stitch that in place. So now take the wrong side of the zipper, the other side. We're going to lay it against the right side of the pocket again. Make sure that's lined up. Stitch. And then once again, we're going to open up this pocket and lay the seam allowance so it's flat against the pocket. So what that does is it makes your zipper tape nice and flat. And we're going to top stitch. From here, you can go ahead and put your zipper pull on and also put some double-sided tape along the edge of the zipper tape. So I'm just going to use 1/8 of an inch. Get it ready to stick in the pocket. And then I'm going to add my zipper pull. Next, we're going to work on our slip pocket. So go ahead and fold the slip pocket piece in half so the short ends meet. And we're going to stitch down the sides. Go ahead and turn your pocket. I'm going to go ahead to the iron and just press that nice and flat. Now that that's pressed, I'm just going to baste this top edge closed. Then take your slip pocket accent piece and put double-sided tape along each long edge. Peel the backing off the tape on one side. And then center the pocket both vertically and horizontally on this slip pocket accent piece. Remove the backing from the tape on the other side and then just fold this over the top edge. Okay, now we're going to top stitch that in place. Once that's stitched, you can go ahead and cut off these little wings here. And then our slip pocket is completed. So we'll set that aside and take out your key fob piece. You're going to put double-sided tape on one long edge. Peel the backing off the tape and then fold this in half so the long edges meet. And then I'm going to stitch using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So from here, I am going to take this to the table, the cutting table, and trim off this raw edge so it's 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that that's trimmed, take one of your swivel clasps and go ahead and fold it over the edge. Now you can either rivet this in place or you can stitch, either one. I'm going to go ahead and set a rivet. Oops, sorry about that. So punch the hole and I'll set a rivet. So now that is completed. I'll set that aside and I'm going to grab my closure piece. Now I drew a line down the center of the closure piece and put a piece of double-sided tape over that line. I'm going to peel the backing off the tape and I'm going to fold these long edges into the center. This is a tiny piece. Now I'm going to top stitch down each long edge. So take this piece and fold it in half. Oh, let me get my threads out. Gone. Fold it in half and then cut it in half. Take your 1/2 inch swivel clasp, your other one, and your 1/2 inch D-ring, and go ahead and slide one on each piece. And you can either wonder clip or baste these closed. Okay, easy enough. So now we're going to take our lining pieces. And I want to find the center of each piece. You can do this at the top and bottom edge. And you're going to take one of your closure pieces and you're going to center it right on that, or place it right on the center mark, okay? And you're going to line up the edges. So the edge of the closure piece is lined up with the edge of your lining. And you can just go ahead and baste that in place. Okay, now take one of your upper lining pieces and find the center of the long edge, the long straight edge. You're going to match up the center with the closure piece. And of course, this is right sides together. And then we're going to stitch this in place. Make sure you go slow over your closure piece. You should have enough clearance where you're not going to hit the metal, the actual closure piece. It should be pretty close though. When I use my industrial machine, I have to switch to my zipper foot here. Okay, now you're going to open this, just flip it up, and you're going to stitch on the upper lining, catching the seam allowance underneath. That is the most wonderful thing about this Burnette is that you don't need hump jumper. It just stitches right over humps. It's amazing how it works. It's that differential feed and it is just fantastic. So that's what we have. We're going to repeat that process on the other lining piece. First put the closure on. And then I will put the upper lining on. Okay, we're going to flip this piece up and we're going to top stitch. There we have it. So what we're going to do from here is on this piece with the swivel clasp, we're going to put our zipper overlay. So measure down, I give you a measurement in the pattern as to how far down to come down, or to come, down from, and basically you're gonna come down from the top seam. The reason why we put this on first is because we really want to make sure that the placement of the clasp isn't gonna get in the way of our pockets, and in the O-ring as well, or the D-ring as well on the other side. So make sure you put double-sided tape on both sides of your overlay piece on the back. You can remove the backing from the tape, and then center this overlay down from that seam. And just kind of double check and make sure that it's not going to be, and it is a little tricky to, but you can kind of get an idea of where you need to put it. Just make sure that it is not, the clasp is not going to be in the way of you opening and closing your zipper pocket, okay? So it's going to be centered is right about here. So the clasp will fall on the zipper overlay, but it should not fall where your zipper is going to be. We're going to stitch around the outside box of this zipper overlay. From here, go ahead and cut the center out of the zipper pocket space, I guess it is. It's not really a zipper pocket. It's where we're going to put the zipper. Okay, and take your zipper pocket, which should now have your zipper pull and the double-sided tape on it. Remove the backing from the tape and then center the zipper both vertically and horizontally in the opening. Okay, and now we're going to stitch around the inside edge. So from here, we're going to flip this over and take our top pocket and go ahead and fold it down to the bottom pocket and wonder clip it in place. And of course, whenever you do a zipper pocket this way, you always have some extra pocket at the bottom. Should be anywhere between 1 inch and 1.25 inches. So go ahead and cut that off. And then flip this over again. Go ahead and peel the side back, and we're going to stitch down this edge. We're going to turn, we're going to stitch across the bottom, and then we're going to turn and stitch up the other edge. We are closing this pocket because we're not turning this bag. We're going to finish it a different way. And there is our completed zipper pocket. You can trim some of the seam allowance out if you'd like. Okay, from here we're going to go to the other side and we're going to put our slip pocket in place. So we're going to do the same thing from the center mark here. We're going to measure down, and we want to make sure that the D-ring doesn't get in the way of us getting in and out of our pocket. So I'm going to just, roughly measure down. I give you a measurement in the pattern. And then we're going to stitch this in place. Now, if you would like to divide this pocket, you can. personally, I love having a pen pocket. You know, it's just one of those things. It seems like wherever I go, somehow, somewhere, somehow, somebody needs a pen. So usually when I make a pen slot, I measure over 1.5 inches and then come on down. And then we will stitch this pocket in place. I have a couple of pins handy right here. My sew tights are in another place, so I'm just going to put a pin in here so that it stays straight. So if you would like, you can go ahead and put some rivets in the sides here and here in the center where the pen pocket is. It's not necessary, it's purely 100% optional. I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I'm also gonna take this to the iron so I can go ahead and get my pen mark off. Okay, I have my rivets installed, everything is good to go. So now what I wanna do is take my 2 lining pieces and put them right sides together. I'm gonna make sure my upper linings match exactly perfect. And then I'm going to clip the rest of the side. Do the same thing on the other side. And then I'm going to make sure I remember my key fob. Go ahead and stick that in on one side. And it doesn't really matter which one. It's whichever you prefer. And let it hang down as much or as little as you'd like. You have some extra room here. And now we're going to go ahead and stitch. There is no need to increase your seam allowance as you stitch the side seam. That's already been taken care of in with the pattern. We're going to, if you need to wonder clip this bottom, you can go ahead and wonder clip the bottom. We're going to stitch the bottoms together. And now from here, I'm going to go ahead and trim back my seam allowances, except for this top portion. I want to leave this 100% because I would like to make sure I can open up the seam allowance as I stitch. Now you could just take this to the iron and open these seam allowances, or you could finger press them too. You don't have to trim them. I might do that. I might just open them up. A lot of times you can roll them with a roller. You want to make sure they're all going to lay flat for you. And then you will go ahead and wonder clip your corners. So you're going to box your corners. So I'm going to match the seam for the side and the bottom. Go ahead and finger press this open. You can do that, or you can trim and nest the seams, whatever works best for you. Again, you can take it to the iron. Match your seam, side seam to your bottom seam, and then we're going to stitch. Now you do want to trim this boxed corner seam. One thing you can do, and this is not in the pattern, but it's just a little trick, a little hint that I do sometimes, is in order to keep this part of the seam open, because this is the part that obviously doesn't want to stay open, I will go ahead and just take a little stitch right on top of my upper lining stitches, just to hold that down. So you can barely see that there. And all it does is just hold that seam open. Oh yeah, you do want to definitely trim your key fob. If you have extra, get that gone. And that holds that nice and open. And I'll probably just take this to the iron and just touch that down with the iron so that it stays nice and flat. So the lining is complete. You can see it here. So again, everything the same, good to go. Let's go ahead and put this bag together. So go ahead and grab your main section here. I'm going to zoom out because we've got a big bag. So let's see how we do this. And take your lining, you're going to slip it right inside. Now, if you have, you know, one section that you typically like better than the other as far as being your front or your back, make sure that you accommodate for that. I'm just going to slip that right in. Should go in nice and easy. And then, as you probably guessed, we're going to go ahead and match up the side seam of the lining with the side seam of the top of the bag. And do the same thing on the other side. And then of course we're going to match our middles. We're just going to go all the way around and wonder clip this entire top in place. All the way up to the top of the strap connectors here, okay? So just go ahead and work on getting all that wonder clipped all the way around. Again, all the way up to the top of the strap connectors like this. Okay, so when we stitch, we're going to stitch up, over, and all the way down. And get this put together. So I have this whole top section here wonder clipped, ready to go. I'm going to remove this table to do this part. Just go ahead and set it down. And what I'm going to do is just kind of baste this entire top section together. Now, it is going to be covered when we put the binding on top of it, but you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is don't get too aggressive with the seam allowance. You want the seam allowance to be about 1/8 of an inch. I don't worry if you have some sections that don't exactly match up, okay? Because we're gonna go back and we're gonna trim those down. But everything should match up pretty well. You know, around the curves, sometimes maybe your front piece or your upper lining piece might not, like you can see here, I've got a little bit of a, you can see right there, and you'll see it more after I stitch it, like, you know, maybe one of these pieces is a little wider than the other. Don't worry about all that right now. All we want to do is to stitch this all the way around, including these top edges, okay? So all the way around, across this edge, all the way around, you know, the whole thing, and just get it so everything is stitched together. We take these wonder clips off. And it doesn't really matter where you start because, again, we're going to cover this up. And do one more stitch. Oh, I ran out of bobbin right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and replace my bobbin and then just stitch from here to here. Luckily I did that before I put the binding on. So now that all of that is stitched, I'm going to take some time to even up my edges. So you can see here that the lining is a little bit taller than the exterior of the bag, okay? And even like right here, you can see some of that. That's gonna happen. That's just the way it is. I mean, you're not gonna get this exactly perfect. So what I'm gonna do is just go through and trim all of this so that these edges are even. The more even you can get the edges, the easier it's gonna be to put the binding on. So go ahead and just spend a little time going around and evening everything off. You want it to be even when you look at it from both the front and the back, meaning, you know, both this side and this side. You want to make sure everything looks good and even. So I'm going to go through and trim everything. You do the same and then we'll finish up. Everything looks pretty good. All these edges are looking good. It's such a pretty bag, isn't it? So let's set that aside and take our binding pieces, and we want to put, and you want to use something really thin, like 1/8 of an inch double-sided tape on the edges. Now, this tape I'm using is a less sticky version of the Wah-Whack tape. You know, they've got the Hyper Stick and they've got a couple different versions. And the reason why I'm using this is because I'm on my Burnett, and my Burnett doesn't love double-sided tape, where my industrial doesn't really care. So I'm using a little bit less sticky version because you are going to be stitching through this. There's really no way around that. So don't forget to check out our resource page on our website. When you go to our website and you go to resources, not only are there resources for where to find things like sew type magnets, you've got a coupon code for that, you've got a coupon code for Burnett, you've got a coupon code for Purple Hobbies, which is the edge guide that I use. She's got a lot of really cool tools. But there's also an entire section of recommended products, things I like to use, not only on Amazon, although we do have an Amazon store, but also just from different suppliers. So, you know, whether it be Rocky Mountain Leather, Wah-Whack, you know, maybe just some special tools that I like, check out that resource page. It is really a great thing to browse and just see if there's anything that you might be missing that might make your life a little easier. And I'm always looking for things too. So if you have something really cool that you want to share and let me know about, I'd be happy to find out about it and test it. Okay, so now that the binding has got the double-sided tape on it, what we're going to do is just peel one side of one of these pieces off. Now let me just say this too. Up to this point, and actually even up to putting the binding on, version 1 and version 2 are the same. The only thing that's different is how we attach the handles at this point. So whether you're doing version 1 or version 2, I'm not going to do a whole separate section of the video just to show you how to do what we just did for version 2. All right, so peel the backing off one side. And you want to put it on the right side first. And you really want to try to line it up with the edge of your tape, okay? So I'm going to start over here on this side. And I actually told you 1/8 of an inch. You really want to use 1/4 of an inch here, sorry, 1/4 of an inch tape. And you're going to be lining the edge of the tape. Okay, see how you can't see the tape? It's because the edge of the tape is lined up with the edge of the bag, the top of the bag here. okay? And we're just gonna go all the way around. Now there's no need to snip or clip or anything like that. You just wanna make sure you're covering your stitch line. And just curve it all the way around. Okay, so that's what you have. And you see it's kind of gapping a little bit, and that's okay. So what we're going to do now is remove the backing off the other side. And we're going to fold this over the edge. So maybe go ahead and start in the middle here. Okay, and that's what we have. Now, what you really want to try to do is to make sure that the back part of this binding is either even with the front part or slightly longer, because we're going to be stitching from the right side, and we're going to make sure that we stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, and we want to obviously make sure it catches in the back. Okay. So we're going to repeat that on the side, and of course the back and the other side as well. So I'm going to start here in the front, make sure the tape is lined up. Now the inspiration for this bag was actually a Brahmin bag. However, I have to say it kind of also reminds me of the Todd's Timeless Tote bag that I did in leather a while back. We did a project box with that. Very similar shape. Now when you go to put your sides on, you're going to have extra here. Okay, just go ahead and cut that off. Again, you should be using 1/4 inch tape here, not 1/8 of an inch. Sorry about that. All right, so we're going to fold this over. Now, the materials I'm using for this bag are our faux suede and camel. Of course, our newest faux hair on hide. This is the golden brown, matches amazing with the camel suede. And then using the Harper Saffron lining, and it's cotton lining by Tilda. It is a Tilda product. We love Tilda. Okay, have that on. Peel the backing off. And one more. And this is where you're going to have your extra. Go ahead and cut that off. The other bag is our crocodile ostrich in gray, black, solid black, and then our suede gray. And then the lining is a Tiny Dots gray by Tilda. All right, so we're ready to stitch. So as you have probably guessed, we're going to go ahead and stitch each one of these binding pieces on, okay? No wonder clips needed. Let's go ahead and get those out of the way. Just take your time with this and go all the way around. Now, don't worry about stitching on this part again here. That's actually all gonna be hidden. So I'm just gonna start here, back stitch, go all the way around to the other top edge, back stitch, cut the threads, and then start over again to do each section. So I'm going to do this in 4 sections. Okay, so let's take a look. Looks great. Let's take a look at this side. And there we go. Okay. So I'm just going to keep on stitching. Okay, there's the back side of that one. And the front. We have this part completed. So the version 2 bag is exactly the same up to this point. So we're going to finish this one, version 1, and then I'm going to take version 2 to this point, and then we'll continue on version 2. So for version 1, next step is going to be to take these connectors, these little strap connectors, and fold them so that they are folded in half. And you want to fold them with the pleat towards the front. Okay. Do the same thing here. I'm going to fold with the pleat towards the front. Okay, do the same thing on the back. And then we're going to stitch these. Now, this part of the, oh, the clip broke. This part of the bag, these little connector pieces, are going to be hidden up inside the handles. So we're not going to really have to worry about, you know, how good it looks when we stitch. But what we want to do is go ahead and stitch down. It's going to be about 1.5 inches. We want to stitch to right before this curved edge here, okay? So just from the top down about 1.5 inches. Make sure you back stitch real well. So from here, go ahead and just cut your threads, kind of clean everything up. And then we're going to do some measuring on our handle pieces. So take your 2 handle pieces. And I give you some measurements in the pattern. And what we're going to do is measure from the short edges up. We're going to make 2 marks and we're going to punch holes. Now, these are, you can either use rivets here to secure the handles on, or you can use Chicago screws. Either way, you're going to need 1/2 inch size for this. Okay, so I will go ahead and measure and mark. Okay, so from here, go ahead and take a hole punch and punch holes in the handle pieces. And when you punch, of course, you're going all the way through to the other side. Okay, now you want to make, first of all, make sure the holes that punched all the way through. I need to make a couple little cuts here. All right, I'm going to work at making sure these holes are punched really well. And then we'll continue. I have all my holes cleared out and ready to go. So what you're going to do is just kind of squeeze your handle. And when you do, you're going to, of course, have this middle section open. And we're going to slide these connectors right into these openings. So make sure the unstitched portion of your handle is facing forward. And then you're just going to open this up and slide this right on. And basically it's going to come down about as far as where the actual curve starts. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing over here. You just want to make sure they're about even. And if you need your awl, you can go ahead and use it to help push it in a little bit. Okay. So what we're going to do now, well, actually, I'm going to put the back on first, and then I'm going to mark the holes through the holes that we already have. So, sorry, I thought I got all these. Got one here that needs to be clipped. Okay, so I'm going to slip it on here, onto the back. And I see I've got a little bit of a uneven edge here. I'm just going to even that up. Open this up. And this is the reason why we wanted to make sure we didn't put any double-sided tape on these short edges, is because we're sliding these handles in. And when you feel the edge, the edge of the connector should be well beyond your hole, okay? And overall, you just want to make sure that the handles are even, obviously. If not, just kind of shimmy it down a little more if you need to. I always seem to have one that doesn't want to cooperate. There we go. Okay. Okay, so that's about even. So from here, use your silver marking pen to make the marks. And I say this because I've tried to just punch through this, just use my hole punch. And what happens is it ends up not lining up on the other side. So it's probably a little better if you use a silver marking pen and just go ahead and mark the placement of the holes. And then go ahead and punch your holes. Looks like they all went through fine. Got one little clip I need to make here. All right, and then we're going to just slide this back on. Line the holes up. And you could theoretically just go ahead and punch through if you'd like. I just found that when I did that, it didn't quite match up on the other side. The problem with doing it this way is that now you got to match up the holes. That went pretty easy. And again, Chicago screws work fabulous here. This is the one I had to kind of shimmy in with my awl before, so let me go ahead and get it in. Okay, there's one. So let's go ahead and mark the holes here. Make sure this is still lined up. My hole punch, I don't know if you remember the story, but my hole punch that I used for years got confiscated at the airport when I was flying out to Sacramento. And so I had this spare, and I don't like it. It is not good. So anyway, I need to get myself another hole punch. See if I can get these lined up. It's too big for my hand. It's like I can hardly get my hand around it. And then when I get my hand to a point where I can manage it, the hole punch is too close. So anyway, one of those things. I'm glad I had a spare, but and then it doesn't seem to cut very well. And anyway, the problems of a bag maker. So one of my rivets went flying off the table, so I'm going to have to go retrieve it. So I'm going to go ahead and get these holes lined up and get the rivets set, and then I will continue on with version 2 so that we can basically take it from the part where the binding is on and how to add the strap connectors. Okay. So I will finish this up and see you on the other side. Version 1 is completed. Looks amazing. Set my rivets. Now, if you have Chicago screws instead of rivets, no problem. You just install them. Basically, it's easier. You screw them in. I would suggest Loctite on the screws just to make sure that they don't come undone. And otherwise, you are done with version 1 if you chose that version. Okay, so we're gonna set that aside. And my version 2 is done through the point of the binding, okay? So now what we have is we have these edges up here that have no binding. And when you put your binding on version 2, the binding's cut a little bit bigger, so you have these little extra pieces. Keep those, because what we're going to do is just kind of make sure these edges are even. And we're going to put these little binding pieces on the ends. Okay, so just take one of the pieces, doesn't matter which one. Go ahead and line them up. I'm going to cut it in half. And then peel the backing off the tape on the other side. Fold it over. And then you can cut it even with the edge. Okay, and we'll stitch that in just a minute. Let's go ahead and do the other 3. Lay this down. So go ahead and stick it on. And again, if you're using 1/4 inch, it should match up. I don't have any 1/4 inch. I apparently ran out, so I'm limping along with 1/8 of an inch here. Fold it over. Cut that off. And then once you get these on, any extras you can go ahead and throw out. You're not going to need them. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and stitch these in place. Okay, so I'm going to clean up all my threads and then we will come back and install our handle. I give you some measurements in the pattern as to where to punch holes in these strap connector portion of the bag. Now, if you don't have rivets, the rivets, that 1/2 inch rivets are going to be way too big for this. So you're really going to need rivets, or you can stitch instead. If you want to stitch these strap connectors in place, then don't punch holes, okay? So once you punch the holes though, if that's the way you decide to go, go ahead and put your O-ring on, or again, if you're just gonna stitch, then obviously don't punch your holes and put the O-ring on. And you're just gonna kind of bring this down as far as it'll go. It's not gonna go any further than where the bag starts to curve, okay? And then you're just gonna fold the strap connector portion back on itself. Okay, so you can see that right there. So from here, you want to go ahead and mark the holes through the existing holes you already made. And then you're going to do that for each one of the 4, and then you're going to go ahead and punch these holes. So I've got the O-rings riveted on. That was my chosen method. And in the pattern, I of course give you measurements as to where to punch the holes for the handles. So I went ahead and did that, and now all I'm going to do is to go ahead and rivet the handles on. Now, you can certainly stitch these on instead. You do not have to rivet. The rivets for the handles are going to have to be slightly larger than the rivets that you use to get the O-rings on, just because the handles are thicker. And so you are going to have a little bit different size there. Of course, you can certainly, like I said, stitch instead. But you will just go ahead and place the handles on. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that up, get my handles on, and then we will take a look at both bags. So here we have the finished bags, the Talise. Version 1 has the O-ring detail down the front where we weave the strips through the O-rings. Gorgeous, gorgeous. Also has a pleat here at the top. No slip pocket in the back, however, you can certainly add one if you would like. All of the handles are actually either riveted or Chicago screwed on, one of the two, whichever you prefer. It does have a, as you know, a snap closure here, or a swivel clasp D-ring closure. It's not really a snap, it's more of a hook closure. And this is just like the inspiration bag, okay? That's what they use, so that's what I used. Now inside, of course, you know, we've got all kinds of goodies. We have our normal slip pocket. We also have our zipper pocket, and of course a key fob. So this is a really good size, kind of like mid-shoulder bag. The measurements end up being right around 12 inches wide at the bottom by about 12 inches tall, and you've got a 4-inch depth here. Now the other version is really the same except for the way the handles are connected. And you can see here that instead of having a pleat, we have just a flat top, and we use the O-rings on the handle connectors, or the handles instead of the front panel. I really feel like if you had O-rings down the front and O-rings here at the top, it'd be a lot of O-rings, be a lot of hardware. And not to mention can get costly. So one or the other. And then of course in the back of this version, we have a slip pocket that you can fit your cell phone in. Accent strips, which this is really, the inspiration bag was kind of a combination between these two, because it was kind of set up like this with the accent strips, but then it had the pleat. So again, the Talise, it is a mid-size shoulder bag. I hope you really enjoyed the tutorial, and until next time, everybody, happy sewing.